Okay, everyone, hello, how are you doing? I don't have anyone in the voice chat with me yet. Pip said he'd probably be in the text chat, but he can't join in voice, but we'll see who else shows up. But I'm just going to do this for the article this week, Why Laissez-Faire Lovers Are the Real Anti-Capitalist. Can you smell the fail already? So thank you so much for joining me for this. We'll see who shows up in the chat, and we'll go over this article on Evonomics by Dustin Mineau. And he is talking about the concept of economic rent. Now, he completely munges up the history of this, and as we'll see in a second, he doesn't even really know what it is. It was an idea that was first formulated by David Ricardo, but it wasn't really all that formal, and people didn't really look at that until the early 20th century, where they came up with this idea of rent-seeking. And it came because they were noticed that ordinarily in an economy, the people who provide goods and services and things like that do so because it's a mutually beneficial exchange. In other words, they're making money because wealth is created. How you doing, Manny? Well, rent-seeking is where you try to get around that. You're trying to insert yourself into that chain and get some money that you don't really deserve. So kind of like the ones who do a copyright claim against one of your videos because a few seconds of it sounds kind of like some music they made, and so they want your monetization money from that video, even though they didn't have anything to do with the creation of the video. They didn't help you create it or anything. They didn't put in any effort towards the video, but they still want to make some money. A big example that we've seen today, more modern, is when you have companies like Uber and Lyft, and you have the traditional taxi industry, which was very much a case of a lot of political favors. You had a license from the legitimate, proper taxi people, and they, like, government limited the number of medallions they would give out and things like that. And so all of the taxis operated in this very protectionist little industry there in that city or whatever. And then Uber and Lyft come along, and they're doing it the free market way. And so the taxi people get all bent out of shape, and they go running to the government to try to put the screws on Uber and Lyft. California has just done this, their law to, it doesn't quite ban freelancers, but it puts a lot of restrictions on them. That's gone into effect this year. That's the kind of thing they're trying to do. Well, that's rent-seeking, because when you have Uber, you have the Uber drivers, and you have the passengers, the people who are actually paying for the Uber service. They're all voluntarily interacting with each other. And so everyone who is making money is contributing to the wealth of what's going on. The taxi people aren't, because they're not a part of that, but they either want some of the license money from it, make them pay a license so they can get some of it for themselves, even though they're not doing anything, or they want some other kind of restriction put on them so that fewer people will be able to take Uber and Lyft and more people will be able to take taxis. So that's the idea of rent-seeking. But so this guy, he is just, it is amazing how arrogant people are when they really don't know what they're talking about. He could have just looked this up and corrected himself, but he didn't. He says the term economic rent is basically gone because of the greatest political coup in the history of our republic, and talks about how, reading it makes your eyes glaze over, things like that. But of course, he is the smart one, and he will tell you all about it. And so, of course, he's making this against conservatives and other. Well, I mean, he says conservatives. He's really talking about libertarians, Austrian economists, free market economists, maybe even Chicago school monetarists. Supply and demand capitalism. Let the markets work. And so he talks about Adam Smith observing that production required land, capital, and labor. What we say nowadays is natural resources, capital, and labor, because it's not just land. But he's talking about the owners of the land are the rentiers. any money is made between the rentiers, the capitalists, and the workers. And when you go through this, I'm not going to read all of this because it's incredible thing. He thinks that rent-seeking means landlords who have land and are offering you service so that you can live there or run your business there and you pay rent for it, and that's what rent-seeking is. No, that's not what, that has nothing to do with rent-seeking. And I know that that's kind of the fad among the progressive liberals that, landlords are, these horrible people. They just take and they don't do anything, which is not true. They do a lot. They maintain the property. They're the ones who built the things in the first place. So, and particularly among the more communist side of things, where basically anyone owning land is just so horrible because that should belong to the glorious collective to use whatever. So notice they're not giving up their land, but anyway. And he's talking about treating land and capital as the same, which no, land is considered natural resources, not capital. But he does this so that he can equate economic rent with the idea of charging rent for land as opposed to the rent seeking I was just talking about. So for Mo and others who were just joining us, what does rent seeking mean? The example I used was Uber and Lyft, how they're using market competition for the taxis, and everyone involved, Uber, the Uber drivers, and the passengers, they pay for it and they get something out of it. Both sides are in an economic transaction, so both sides benefit. Whatever side is getting the money is creating wealth for the ones giving the money. Well, rent seeking is when you have like the taxi companies running to the government saying, hey, they can't compete with us, and making them pay licenses or putting all sorts of other regulations on them to try to inhibit them, so that the taxi companies can make money even though they're not a part of that. So, if you have a business and you're renting space to run your business, and then your customers come in and buy things, and then you pay your rent every month to the landlord, everyone involved in a voluntary exchange is either paying money or creating wealth. So the customers come in and they buy the things, and the business is creating wealth for the customers because they're giving them the products and services they want. And then the business takes some of that money and pays the landlord in return for the landlord giving them a place to do business and a place that's nice and visible where people will come to, and probably pay more money for land that's like on a road that's heavily used, or a place where there's a lot of foot traffic or something like that, because you'll get a lot more business that way. But rent seeking is not about the landlord charging him rent. It's about someone else coming in and say, hey, you owe us. It's kind of like the mob coming around wanting their protection money. Well, they're not actually offering any service. And even if they are offering a service, if it's something like the local power company, in most places that's a monopoly because the government says so. They've just passed a law that says that no one can compete with that. So even though the power company is providing a service, they're grabbing up all the business in that area, which they probably wouldn't have if there were the ability of other power companies to compete with them. So that's what they're talking about when they're talking about rent seeking. It's using the political system to kind of insert themselves in there through licenses, through IP, through all sorts of things to do this. But he thinks it's renting out land, so that's the dumb thing there. So then he goes into the late 60s and early 70s, and this is kind of where you had that brief little revival of like Hayek's views on economics. Economic rent saw a small revival among select economics. For those select few, rent-seeking was no longer defined as just ownership of the land. Well, it was never defined that way. That's not what it means. Rent-seeking is any income that is unearned, but again, a landlord charging you rent has earned that because he's providing the property and keeping it maintained and everything. Economic rent can come from ownership of land and just renting it out for money. See, that's what he thinks it is. That's just dumb. It can also come from collecting so much capital that a firm now has a monopoly and can set the price independently of supply and demand considerations. How many times have we shown that's crap? Oh, Pip says, taking back Adam Smith. I hate this language. It almost always means putting words in dead men's mouths. Yeah, well, they're not alive to defend themselves and say, hey, that wasn't what I said. Also, I think we've learned a few things in the couple hundred years since Adam Smith was. I think we've progressed a little bit. And manicable law offering a peaceful service is oppression. Yeah, that kind of how it seems to be with leftists. So, now he does say that it can be from government monopoly granting, but that's the only way it can be. There's no other way anyone has found to make that happen. But he claims that it comes from control of other land like our rivers. Yeah, well, see, there's the word our rivers right there. It's a collective, or it's considered to be a collective, as opposed to if rivers actually were privately owned. Broadband spectrum, of course, that's monopolized and doled out by the FCC. Or mineral rights of land. If you own land, you own the stuff on it and in it. Yeah, mineral rights is not rent seeking. It's just, this guy doesn't understand what he's talking about. It's just that simple. It can come from control of financial assets like capital gains, dividends, and interest on loans, especially usury. Yes, he's calling loaning out money for interest to be a kind of economic rent, even though that's a very valuable service as well. And it can come from political favors to the government. Okay, now he's back on track. That's what rent seeking is. It's political favors from the government. There's no other way it can happen. Because he's talking about usury. I mean, okay, yes, in this system where we have a central bank that's captured everything, yeah, that's rent seeking writ large. Because you've got a system where the central bank, the Federal Reserve, and by extension the Treasury, massively profits from this. The banks are getting all sorts of profits that they wouldn't otherwise. But in a free market, when you have usury, you have a way of encouraging people to engage in deferred gratification, which is how you create new wealth. How do you get, I've talked about this before with Say's Law and other things like that. How do you get new things coming about? It has to be through investment. Well, how do you get people to invest? Well, you offer them a return on their investments. That's what usury is. So, anyway. Economic rent was something I'd learned about in school and quickly forgot about once the class was over. Yeah, I don't think it clearly didn't stick. Now, in a post-bailout world, I run across it again one day while reading another article. The rentiers have taken over our country by masquerading as capitalists. How did this happen? Simple. Once the neoclassicals removed the entire concept of rentier from the economic and eventually political conversation, it was all capitalism and capitalists in their world. No. If you're engaging in capitalism, you're not engaging in economic rent. Now, when progressives rail against the unearned income of the renters, the progressives are the ones doing most of it. What did we see in California basically all last year that got them Idiot of the Year? Esso in the House, Back Alley Philosophy. Thoughts on Mises and Socialism, explaining how the extent to which people are incentivized to seek rental property and rent out property in state societies are influenced mainly by the state. Hello. If you missed it, Esso, this guy thinks that when they talk about rent seeking, that they literally mean renting out property. So let's see. Conservatives try to make it look like liberals are railing against capitalism itself or against business in general, because they pretty much are. Many times we're fighting against the excesses of capitalism. What we're actually fighting is parasitic rentiers that are hurting the true capitalists as much as the workers. When a company has a monopoly and can charge whatever they want, that's not being a capitalist or an entrepreneur, that's being a rentier. Yeah, but again, that can only happen with government support. Again, like your local power company. There's never been a case, and we've been over this many times. People are probably going to come in the comments now and go, there's Standard Oil, Cornelius Vanderbilt, and all these things that we've debunked over and over again. No, don't even try. It's just Pratt. It's just Pratt. Yeah. So, yeah, we're talking about government forcefully inserting itself as a player in the market when it doesn't really. Because if something like this, because they're going to go, what about the roads? If any of those government services were things that people really wanted and was worth the money, we wouldn't need government to do it because the market would do it. That's what the market does. That's exactly what it does. That's what it's for. Yeah. Yeah, man, even natural monopoly. Yeah, we went over those for us. When oil companies make windfall profits as the price of oil goes up, that's not profit, that's economic rent. No, that's supply and demand. Unless it's something like OPEC manipulating the prices, which is a bunch of governments colluding to it. So yeah, there's a lot of rent seeking in the oil industry as well. But it's not simply making more profits as the price goes up. That's not how it works. When a drug company can keep the government from negotiating lower prices, oh my God, that is not how it works, you idiot. Yeah. That isn't capitalism, that's rent seeking. Government intruding itself to try and negotiate prices is the rent seeking. Otherwise, it's just supply and demand. 99% of the money made on Wall Street is nothing but pure rent seeking. Yeah, because who needs investments? Investments don't do anything. Companies lobbying for tax loopholes is just more. Okay, there's another example of it. He's got a couple examples of genuine rent seeking. But I mean, those aren't things that would happen in a free market. Those are things that only happen with government. If you don't tax people, then you can't have tax loopholes. So remember how the promoted narrative in the 19th century mainstream press was that monopolies were desirable? Yeah, and that was the thing. That was how AT&T got a monopoly for 40 years when they passed the Telecom Act and said, okay, because of Section 2, now we get to enforce this monopoly, that it was the state's role to try and create monopolies. Yeah, because we can't have thousands of phone companies all over the country. That would be too confusing, even though they did, and people were fine with it. It wasn't the people that were complaining about all these different phone companies. It was AT&T. So, they went to the government and went whining to get this monopoly. Pip, we need government to do this thing that's beneficial to everyone, but wouldn't get done without forcing everyone to fund it for some reason. Yeah, if it's beneficial, people are going to fund it. And so it was recognized even by state socialists, the cartels were the product of the state. Yeah, and that was the idea, that only the state could do this and only the state could manage it. Yeah. It'll equalize access. Yeah, everyone will be in an equally long breadline. All right. Fortunately, some well-known economists do talk about the rentiers. Unfortunately, not nearly enough are. Well, he hasn't really read them, because this is something where I'm even going to agree with economists like Joseph Stiglitz and Thomas Piketty, and I do not agree with those guys often. Hey, Chris, how you doing?
Hey, Shane. Sorry if I'm a little late.
That's okay. I was just getting towards the end of the article here, but I was talking about how even Joseph Stiglitz and Thomas Piketty have the correct idea of rent seeking and why it's a bad thing, because these companies go to the government to try to get favorable regulations passed for them or get licensing money or whatever. So.
Walter.
And you're cutting out again.
I was just saying, Walter Williams said the best way to destroy destroy a city without using bombs is implement regulations on.
Regulations on what you cut out? You've got to find an alternative.
Yeah, rent. Regulations on rent.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's not the kind of rent we're talking about. Rent seeking refers to when you're not providing anything of value and you're kind of inserting yourself by force through the government. You know, like when someone makes a copyright claim on one of your videos and says, oh, we made this little snippet of music that you're using and therefore we need all your monetization. Well, they didn't do anything towards producing your video, but they're wanting the money anyway.
So basically patent trolling.
Well, it could be patent trolling, yeah, and it could be. I also use as an example, you know, Uber and Lyft and how the taxi companies were going, oh no, there's too much competition. We need to go to the government to stop them or make them pay license fees or regulate them or whatever.
Oh yeah, the classic. There's too much competition and people will get confused.
Yeah, the Vanderbilt story about how he took down the steamboat monopoly was great. And whereas you know, they always complain about, you know, the railroads being an example of monopoly. Well, that's because they were heavily enforced by government to the point where you know, you had that thing about, oh yes, government did this great thing by getting the railroads connected across the. Well, what they were doing was, I don't remember the story exactly, but something like they were paying them just by how much rail they laid down. And so they went up to where they met, and they went past each other and kept laying rail because government was paying them for the more rail they laid, and then they had to, yeah, it was Cornelius Vanderbilt. But while they were doing all that, and while they were charging all of this crazy money to, you know, transport goods and deliver the mail and things like that, Vanderbilt was using his steamboats. He would take them down to Nicaragua. Remember, the Panama Canal didn't exist. And then just really quickly ship them across there to another steamboat to take them to California. And he could do it for a lot cheaper than what the railroads were charging, and even deliver the mail for free. So, yeah. Oh, yeah, there was all sorts of corruption in there for that reason. So,
yeah, but I thought Vanderbilt was a robber baron.
Yeah.
That's what my high school teacher told me.
I'm guessing it's because the vast majority of influential economists are still neoclassicals and don't believe land and rentiers exist. I mean, when you the public choice people like James Buchanan, they talk about this all the time. So I don't know. I don't know who he's reading. He doesn't cite any sources, of course. Well, I don't know. I haven't checked a lot of these links to see where they go, but okay, that one, the rentiers, is a link to Paul Krugman. I can't see what the ft.com, something like that. I'm not sure what that is, but it's a blog. So yeah, if I followed the links, I doubt I'd be really all that impressed by them. They can try to deny their existence, but when I see the top 1% of the country make more money in one night while they're sleeping than most will work making on their jobs for 6 months, it's not that they're making more money while they're sleeping. It's that they put the work in a while back, and now they're reaping the rewards for it. You know, that's not rent seeking. Rent seeking would be if they were raking it in from the government, which of course would be very bad. And a lot of them do that. So where does that leave us now? One could argue history is repeating itself. 200 years ago, the conservative versus liberal mantra was that conservatives were fighting to keep the power of the nobles and large landlords intact. The liberals were the ones trying to free themselves politically and economically from their control. Well, then, when they were saying the word liberal back then, they basically meant libertarian. They did not mean what liberals have captured the term.
Then the progressives took over the.
Yeah, let me switch server locations. It's on east. I think changing it to, was it south or central? One of those made it work better. Okay, try that again, Chris.
Occupy movement.
Yeah, try saying what you were just saying again.
I was about to say, they said, they
It's still
bunk
cutting
that
out.
back and Occupy Wall Street.
Yeah, we really have to see if we can get some time to try out riot.im and see how that, because that's supposed to work with direct voice to voice, not going through Discord central servers, which I think is the real problem. I was looking at it last night and I was getting dropped packets from Discord. So yeah, so we just need to find a better solution for this.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're really stuttering. But today it's the same. Conservatives are fighting to maintain the privilege of the rentiers by pretending to defend capitalism itself. And once again, us liberals are fighting to free the market from the parasitic rentiers. You are the parasitic rentiers.
It reminds me. You know what? It kind of reminds me of. It reminds me of.
Oh man. Let me see if I can cut down the kilobits and see if that'll help. Okay, try that again.
I was about to say, this reminds me of those socialists, that say, we just want a commonwealth of worker confederations, where everything's owned and distributed equally and all that.
Yeah, I'm getting every other word. Let me see, is there anything I can... Yeah, I don't know. But anyway, that's the article. Another one from back in 2016. But yeah. Yeah, Manny, just the same old socialist tropes.
Yep.
And Pip, it's what happens when the state gets its fingers into something.
Yeah. No, but that's not real socialism.
Yeah.
Yeah, speaking of which, you gotta check out that episode of Jack Ryan. It's real cringy when they talk about...
I really have no desire to watch that show. Even just the previews make me cringe. Oh, wow.
What?
I am dropping packets from you all over the place. When you were trying to speak just now, it dropped 140 packets. Yeah, it's got to be something with my connection to Discord. I don't know. We just need to find another solution for this.
Captain Pipsqueak said the free market enables parasites.
Free market enables parasites, cried the parasites. Yeah.
Yeah.
And SO liberals are just efficiency experts for the states. Literally, liberal philosophy in its origins was just a criticism of mercantilism from a perspective of efficiency.
But yeah, Shane the Jack.
Let me switch servers again because you're dropping packets all over the place. See if there's another one that'll help it work a little better. Let's try US Central because I think that's where you are anyway. See if that works better. Okay, now try it. Hello?
Is it better?
Well, start speaking and I'll know. Nope. Oh, God. 26% packet loss. Are you kidding me? What is the... I'll try a different one. I see, I tried south. Well, let me try east. East hasn't always worked 100%, but it's the other one that's close.
So is it good?
Hang on, let me see. All right, start speaking and I'll know.
Okay, is it working now? Is it working?
A little bit of stuttering, but better.
Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, that Jack Ryan video I showed you, it's like, basically it says the reason why Venezuela is the way it is isn't because of socialism, it's because of corruption and nationalism, and it's...
And it doesn't really link the two. Yeah, and you're starting to go out again. Oh man, a lot of jitter. Jitter and dropped packets. I don't... Because every time I test my cable connection somewhere with one of the servers, I actually get basically 0 packet loss. So I don't know what this is with Discord or whatever. But that's what's happening, is packet loss. Let's see. Try out Talks, Mumble, and Riot. I'm going to try Riot. The other two I don't like because they charge. Or Riot's P2P too. Anyone else notice that from Pip? Marxist criticisms of capitalism more accurately describe their own proposals. That's exactly it, yeah. They claim that capitalism enables fat rich cats to live off the labor of workers, but common ownership mathematically incentivizes parasitism. And SS says a great example of that is the shrinking markets problem.
And the funny irony is that, if I recall correctly, Karl Marx himself was largely a parasite, because...
Oh, he was completely a parasite.
Yeah, he didn't... Yeah, you know, I mean... Yeah, that's another thing people fail to realize. Karl Marx was not an economist. He never studied economics. From what I read, the closest thing he had to studying economics was that he used to go to a bar and drink with some guys who were members of the Hegelian movement.
Now, that's a good point, Manny. The whole thing about, oh, well, Venezuela really went down because the CIA interfered with it. Well, we're against that too, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's actually what a lot of people say about Cuba. They say, oh, you know, yeah, Cuba's got problems, but that's because of the CIA. It's like, the CIA hasn't been involved in Cuba since the...
Yeah, you're dropping out again.
That's another thing. Communists like to say it's actually the embargo that's ruining Cuba. Now, while the U.S. and Cuba, but Cuba is on paper free to trade with everyone else, so...
Yeah, we didn't get much of that, Chris. It's just we're gonna have to go to something else. Discord is not working out for this. All right, well, we're at the end of the article anyway, so I'm just gonna leave it here. So thanks, Chris, for attempting to join and make some good points, and you got a few of them out, and we also got a lot of good ones from the chat as well. So thanks everyone for joining. Thanks for contributing, and thanks as we're going through this article and just seeing this is the kind of thing we're up against. It's not just that they're ignorant, it's that they're spreading their ignorance around and then high-fiving each other, you know, about how, oh, they got all those you know, white supremacist libertarians, that all those, you know, it's just blatant projection, because that's what progressivism is, you know. I'll say it again, progressivism was born out of the eugenics movement, but, you know, land is terrible, rent is terrible, usury is terrible, but they're not talking about that. They're talking about economic rent, which is different. Yeah, Mumble also charges, George, which is what and if you're an open source project but you charge money, I'm immediately suspicious of you. It's one thing if you have like a premium service, but yeah. All right. But anyway, thanks everyone. Until next time, stay strong and be free.